Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into a massive food company, one based out of Thailand.
That's right. We're looking at Charon Pakhan Foods. You'll see it as CPF BK.
And we've got, well, the kind of materials you'd expect: financial reports, a company briefing document, good stuff to dig into.
Exactly. And our goal here is really just to unpack what these specific sources tell us about CPF.
Yeah, what's the story they present, its global reach, how its business is set up.
Its recent financial health, where it says it's heading strategically, all based on these documents.
Think of it like we're taking this raw info they've provided and finding the key takeaways for you.
Just laying out what the company itself is putting forward in these materials.
Okay, so let's dive in. Who is Charon Pakhan Foods, according to these sources?
Well, first off, it's public ticker CPF BK, based in Thailand.
And the sources give us a sense of scale, right? Ranked, around 25-40 globally by market cap?
Yeah, and that market cap itself, as of June 2025 data in the sources, was sitting around $6.02 billion.
$6 billion. That's substantial. The sources also mention stock performance. Small dip one day, but actually a big jump, like over 34% over the past year leading up to that June date.
And the category is clearly food. No surprises there.
But it's more than just size. The briefing materials really position CPF as a global leader.
They do. They specifically point out being a world leader in animal feed and also in swine production.
A leading player in livestock, generally in a lot of countries.
The reach they claim is pretty staggering, distributing to over 50 countries.
Reaching potentially over 4 billion people. That's a lot of reach from Thailand.
It really is. And the sources also note their recognition, being in the SETI 50 index there in Thailand.
Oh, and that Dow Jones Sustainability Index mentioned for emerging markets.
Right, and that sustainability part, it's interesting because it ties directly into their stated strategy later on. We'll get back to that.
Good point. So how do they manage all this, the business model? The sources kept mentioning this fully integrated business model.
Yes, they did. And the way they describe it is basically controlling the whole process.
Like from the very beginning, feed, farming.
Through the middle part, processing, manufacturing.
All the way to getting it out there, distribution, retail, owning the chain, essentially.
Exactly. Farm to fork, that kind of idea. And this integration lets them diversify.
Into different kinds of animal proteins, right? The sources specifically called out swine, poultry, and shrimp.
Those seem to be the big three for them, and they give examples of where they do what.
Right, like the fully integrated livestock and aquaculture stuff. That's in Thailand, Vietnam, Canada, Taiwan, Malaysia.
Philippines, Laos, Cambodia, a whole list.
But then in China, the source highlighted animal feed and farming specifically.
And then you see the ready-to-eat food operations mentioned for places like Belgium, the U.S., China again, Sri Lanka.
Yeah, and some really specific things stood out, didn't they? Like shrimp farms in the U.S.
And a whole integrated chicken business in India, plus aquatic feed and shrimp processing in India and the Philippines.
And that Sao Ta Foods in Vietnam, focusing on seafood prep.
It paints a picture of a very complex, geographically spread operation.
I thought the affiliated companies listed were also quite interesting. It wasn't just food.
No, definitely not. They listed things like a restaurant Siam Revia.
Yeah, and consulting services, Chia Tai Conti, and even distributing industrial machinery, ECI Metro.
Plus property development with Norfolk Property. It's quite broad.
It suggests they leverage their core business infrastructure into other areas, maybe, based on how the source lists them.
It certainly seems that way from the materials provided. A diverse portfolio, let's say.
So speaking of the food itself,
Yeah.
the sources had images, right, showing their retail products.
Yes, and the variety was pretty wide. You had the basics like raw chicken, pork, shrimp.
But then a lot of ready meals, cooked items, and that plant-based stuff stood out. Meat zero.
Definitely. They showed things like plant-based crispy pork under that brand. It seems like a strategic push highlighted in the materials.
Yeah, alongside, classic Asian dishes, wontons, curries, dumplings.
And then more everyday things like chicken popcorn, sausages, marinated meats for cooking. Trying to cover a lot of bases, it looks like.
It does. And then there's the food service side. That seemed like a big piece, too.
Oh, huge. The Five Stars chain got a lot of attention in the sources.
Over 7,000 outlets. That's massive. It's spread across Vietnam, India, Cambodia, Laos, Philippines.
Right. And the images suggested different formats, too. Little kiosks, shops, even bigger restaurants. Adapting locally.
Makes sense. And they also mentioned another chain, Chester's.
Yep, that was in there too. So a significant presence in both retail products and food service.
Okay, so Connecting this back to their strategy, the sources laid out some key pillars.
They did. Globalization was one, but focused on expanding where they already have a strategic presence.
Digital transformation was another pillar mentioned.
And sustainability, which, like you said, connects back to that DJSI mention
Yeah.
and the UN logos they show.
Right, and the source says their approach there involves using science and innovation for efficiency and reducing environmental impact.
Innovation generally in products and processes was its own pillar, too.
And finally, improving market reach and just being more efficient operationally.
So those are the strategic drivers they're highlighting in these documents.
Okay, let's shift to the numbers. The performance summary comparing fiscal year 2024 to 2023.
Right. So overall sales revenue was actually down slightly, about 1% for the full year 24.
Although the last quarter, Q4, did show a small increase, up 1%.
But the really interesting part, according to the source, was the jump in profitability. Gross profit margin went up to 14.6% in FY24.
That's a decent jump, and the sources explained why, didn't they?
Yes, they pointed to two main things. First, lower costs on the farm production side.
Attributed to efficiency gains and better supply chain management for materials.
And second, they highlighted improving meat prices in key markets. Specifically mentioned swine in Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia.
So costs down, prices up in some areas. Makes sense for better margins.
Exactly. The sources also noted lower financial costs and better results from their associated companies.
Yeah, they called out CPAL and their operations in China and Canada as contributing positively.
Now, the financials also got into metrics like the PE ratio.
Ah, yes, the price-to-earnings ratio. And the source helpfully explains it as, comparing the stock price to the company's earnings per share.
And the numbers provided. For June 2025, the TTM PE was around 9.13. End of 2024, it was 9.54.
Okay, and the source gives context for that number. It says a low positive PE, like under 10.
Often suggests the market sees it as more of a value stock. Profitable, but maybe not expecting explosive growth relative to the price.
Whereas the source contrasts this with, say, a high negative PE, which indicates heavy losses.
Or a PE over 30 or negative, often seen with growth stocks where future expectations are really high.
And looking at the PE history chart in the source, that context is useful. You see big swings.
Yeah, like it was way up near 32 back in 2013, then periods of low positive numbers.
And then that really high negative number, negative 26.1, reported for 2023.
Which, based on the source's explanation, suggests significant losses relative to its valuation in that year.
So that shift from the high negative in 2023 back to the low positive around 9 in 2024-25.
Tells a story, according to this metric and the source's interpretation, of a significant profitability turnaround, driven by those cost and price factors we mentioned.
Right. The sources also briefly mentioned other things like their bond rating A, stable.
And showed some charts on trends for cost of debt and EBITDA, showing fluctuations there over the years, too.
It's important we also cover the risks the sources mentioned, the external factors.
Absolutely. Things outside their direct control that could impact them.
Like broader economic shifts, changes in how much people are spending.
The impact of global trade tensions was listed. That's a big one for a global company.
And obviously for an animal protein company, global animal disease outbreaks, a major risk they identify.
Yeah, along with the general supply and demand situation for meat globally.
Plus interest rate changes and foreign exchange volatility. Standard risks for multinationals, really.
Definitely. Operating in 50-plus countries means exposure to a lot of different economic currents and currencies.
So let's pull back. Why should you, listening, care about this deep dive into CPF's materials?
Well, for starters, it's a really clear, concrete example of how a huge, integrated global food company presents itself and operates.
You get a peek inside the structure, the different business lines, the geographic spread.
And it shows how these big strategic themes, globalization, sustainability, digital transformation, are framed by a company like this. How they say they're putting them into action.
It also gives a practical look at financial metrics.
Yeah.
Like seeing that PE ratio history.
And how the source itself explains its potential meaning, tells a story about performance and recovery within the context provided.
Yeah, it's not just abstract numbers. And finally, it just underlines how broad the food industry is.
Right. From feed mills and farms
to ready meals, plant-based alternatives, and even fast food chains, all under one corporate umbrella, according to these sources.
So, quick recap. CPF, based on these sources, is this major Thai food conglomerate. Deeply integrated model, global reach, diverse products, animal proteins mainly, but also plant-based and food service.
And recent performance for FY24 highlighted a significant profit recovery, driven by lower costs and better meat prices, as per their documents.
The financial snapshot, especially that PE trend, seems to reflect this operational shift they describe.
It's definitely a complex picture, this kind of global food operation.
I'm no doubt about it.
So thinking about that complexity, their global nature, and those risks they list, here's a final thought, something maybe to chew on.
Yeah.
Given everything, how might that constant interplay between, say, driving innovation, maintaining that deep integration they value, and facing all these unpredictable global market forces, how might that shape the future for huge food companies like CPF?
That's a really interesting question. How do those forces balance out for these giants feeding the world? Something to think about.